I feel like because we give certain titles and words to people in football, it makes them sound like they're superhuman. Like a director of football automatically is better at signing players than a manager for no reason. For absolutely no fucking reason whatsoever. Like Eddie, in the group chat yesterday, my guy Josh here goes, trusting Eddie Howe's talent ID over Dan Ashworth, that's questionable, isn't it? I'm like, Eddie Howe signed 1,000 more players than Dan Ashworth. Yeah. But no, I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm not saying that the point is wrong, but just saying there's an idea that Dan Ashworth is like superhuman. But the first question is, how important do we think the director of football is for football?
Massive. I think if you look at all the teams that are doing really well at the moment, you can see a director of football doing a good job there. And especially the teams that have made good signings recently. I think I think we can easily say the top three this season, City, Arsenal, Liverpool, all of them make smart signings. Edu Gaspar at Arsenal's won an award as a director of football. Just below that...
Who gives that award, though?
The director of football, basically, mate. But then just below that, you look at Spurs and Villa. Monchi at Villa, he's worked with Emery for a long time. They've made some amazing signings. And we know at Spurs, even though Patrici isn't officially their director of football, we know he's consulting there. And we know that a lot of those signings were his, and you look at players like Van der Ven, who's been amazing when he comes in there. I think a director of football in the modern era is one of the most underrated things that a club can have. And I think if you look at the big clubs who aren't doing as well at the moment, Man United, the biggest example of that, it's because they lack one of those and they give too much trust to a manager in terms of recruitment.
Well, that was actually a good answer, wasn't it?
Cheers.
I was going to try no, because for a long, long time in football, managers did their own transfers, did their own recruitment. And I'm not saying that they haven't been helped by directors of football, but I just wanted to gauge from the table what level of importance we generally give. I know you do. What about you, Stu?
Has Eddie Howe ever won a World Cup?
No.
Has Dan Ashworth?
Ashworth has won too.
What are you on about?
When Ashworth was with the FA, when he was at the FA, he started with the FA in 2012. In that time, he won the World Cup with the under-17s and the under-20s.
Fuck off.
And that is solely due to him. So when you're saying
smart signing,
exactly,
is it?
Dan Ashworth brought in the England DNA, Brian. Have you not heard this term?
In order to confirm how great football directors are at transfers, this man uses international football as his example.
With teenagers.
Underage international football.
Okay. I do take your point, though. Ashworth has proven himself to some degree. Institutional.
I think Dan Ashworth's got one of the best CVs in directors of football. And if you're thinking about football management and the games that are going to be coming out going forward, I think it's going to be director of football. Because that's far more exciting. Okay. The transfers are way more exciting than the actual management.
You're such a nerd.
When he talks about CVs, though, a director of football, and this was what I found interesting about Eddie Howe's response. They were like, well, what kind of blow is this going to be? And he's like, well, a director of football is a long-term role. So you actually have to be in the role for a long time to actually see the benefits of what he's there to do, because he's there to set up the youth academies, to put long-term infrastructure into a club so that in 10 years we see the results of that. In 18 months of being at Newcastle, he couldn't have even acted on enough of those changes to even see the long-term benefits of it. And he was only at Brighton for 3 years, which I'm not saying he didn't do a good job, but you can't really, it's hard to fully understand how good he was after only 3 years at a club.
In that time, you look at some of the signings that he made and some of the transfer fees that went the other way. You know, you got Trossard, £15 million. That's a pretty good deal. Caicedo, 28 million euros. Pretty good deal. Veltman, that was €1 million they brought in Veltman for. Again, very, very good record. Danny Welbeck on a free. That's a smart transfer. That's a Premier League proven striker there. Cucurella, they brought in for €18 million. Look, they sold.
And are we saying that we know around this table for a fact that football directors are completely in control of transfers? No. Because from what I've understood from day one is that they are in charge of infrastructure, in recruiting scouts who then go and scout the players, players who then tell you who to get. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I'm worried that we're giving Dan Ashworth far too much credit because for weeks and weeks and weeks, a mate of mine who is clued up in the situation at Brighton said, the real story of Brighton isn't Dan Ashworth, it's their scouts. And their scouts have made Dan Ashworth look fucking great. This was months before any of this happened. And I just said, well, I'm glad he's at Newcastle. You know, they seem to be well set up. What the fuck do I know? But I'm just concerned that we're giving this guy a lot of credit when the real name of Dan Ashworth was made at England, which did not include transfers.
That's like saying, you know, a company doesn't need a CEO because the people that underneath him do all the work. It's like, you need a figurehead. You need someone that's going to hire all the
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, are we giving the CEO more credit than we actually know he deserves? I don't know. I don't think we can know.
I think there's a chance that Newcastle, the fan base and the people inside the club are a lot less hurt by this departure than the media are portraying. Because when you look at Dan Ashworth's work there, a good point you made was the fees he's received for players at Brighton, but he obviously had the time on his side to be able to bring those guys in and then obviously move them on at a profit. He didn't have that time on his side at Newcastle to be able to have done that. But when you look at the money he spent, like, I'm not saying that they haven't been hits because he's made some good signings. Obviously Pope on a free, that was a good one. But then when you look at Livramento, Gordon, Botman, a lot of the players who was brought in were brought in for like, you know, not small fees at all. Were brought in for decent money. So I think then when you look at the performances of these guys, they've been good signings. But I get that this is far and few between in modern day football. Not all big money signings are good. But for the money you paid, you'd expect them to be quite good signings, yeah? You've also had signings that they've brought in like Lewis Hall, who you would imagine was something to do with Ashworth if he was...
Bro. We've been asking around this table about Lewis Hall. Why is he not playing? And the rumour has been, not just, you know, now that Ashworth's gone, is Eddie Howe didn't rate him. And it was one that was given to him, forced on him, which we've seen stuff like this happen where managers don't rate players before when chairmen have just got the hard on for a player. But it's ironic that you bring up some of those players because a lot of the Newcastle signings that were made, the best ones, arguably, outside of Gordon, because Gordon was within the Ashworth's tenure, Bruno Guimaraes, Kieran Trippier. I think Isak was made like 30 days after Ashworth signed.
That's not an Ashworth.
So the likelihood you can't give it to him, and Sven Botman. So the 4 out of the 5 best signings Newcastle have made with fuck all to do with Ashworth. So that's why I'm sitting here being like, I think he's probably going to do all right for Man United. And I understand why they want him, but I'm not like thinking that we've lost anything great.
Then when you look at the money he has spent, as I say, they're not gems bought in on the cheap like they were at Brighton. And when you look at the financial sort of situation that Newcastle in at the minute, and it looks like their hands are very much tied, in that January transfer window, when everyone round this table could agree that they needed to go and reinforce, having someone with a track record of being able to bring in capable players on low fees didn't really do anything for you, because the only sort of signings that you were linked with weren't those sort of gems that he was bringing through at Brighton. I get that you've got to give him time in the first team to be able to become that, but it's not like we were seeing his form. If you credit the Brighton success, if you credit that to Dan Ashworth, I don't think you saw it replicated in the early stages.
And then the last summer, which would be the one that you'd have thought would have been more of a Dan Ashworth-led summer, was worse, clearly worse than anything we had when Eddie was more in charge. And I do think part of the reason Ashworth's wanting to leave, from what I'm hearing, and I do hear things, is that he will have more control at Manchester United, and therefore it's a better role for him. But if you look at Livramento, great signing, no complaints about that. Lewis Hall, it's gone down like a lead balloon. Barnes has not been great so far. The last game I watched him in, he looked fucking shit, I've got to be honest. I do think he's better than that. Tonali, that was one of the worst signings in history so far, right? For the amount of money we spent on him. So I don't think there's anything to lose sleep over. I just think the way the guy's going on, particularly as a director of football, someone who you're supposed to be a long-term person. I understand every person, has the right to want a better job, better money, all of that. But your whole point of your role is long-term, and you're leaving after 18 months. Like, there's nothing to say for Manchester United that Real Madrid knocked on his door, see years later. Because that's his fucking track record.
I mean, I don't think Real Madrid are looking at Dan Ashworth.
I don't either.
But do you know what? Like,
I'm just suggesting it's not a
course. Of course, he's going to jump ship when a better opportunity comes to him, or at least what he perceives as being a better opportunity. But I think that the guys in the club are probably looking at it and they're going, this is my sort of very simplistic outlook on it. I think that the guys in the club, including Eddie Howe, are looking at it and thinking, do you know what? We don't not rate his talent ID, but we're not thinking it's going to be the thing that saves this club and moves this club forward. So if we can get what we're hearing, what is it, 20 million in a payout or something?
I don't know, because I think there might be a little bit of revenge here, because when we needed Jesse Lingard, we asked for him on loan right when he was having his purple patch, and they went 15 million for a loan. So I think that there's going to be oh really?
Yeah.
Oh, remember that. Well, because now we've got them by the balls, because we know that they want him, so we can either sit and let him rot and fester for 2 years, or you cough up some decent money for him, which is quite interesting.
Imagine if you do that and then Man United end up backing out of it. How's the feeling going to be around the club about having Dan Ashworth there, knowing you got, let's be honest,
he's never coming back.
A snake in the grass there.
He's never coming back.
Yeah.
No way, because they've already made that absolutely clear. Like, you're done.
Do you know what? I think there's a lot of short-termism there as well, you know, like, look, Man United, we were talking earlier about sort of the biggest clubs in Premier League history and whatever, and just because they're not the Man United of old, they're still Man United, they're still a massive powerhouse. However, does anyone seriously around this table think that in 10 years' time, it's a foregone conclusion that Man United are in a better position than Newcastle? Because I get it slowed down on what our general expectations were when Newcastle were brought over. But I don't think if you're looking, and we were talking about this being a long-term role, this is the sort of thing you want to be at for 5+ years minimum, right? I don't know if in that time Man United are going to be sitting pretty over Newcastle.
There's two reasons why I think they might. What we've seen in terms of FFP over the last year or so is that that's been enforced in a way where Newcastle are kind of hamstrung by it now. You can't spend in the way you thought you would. And we know that United, because of the commercial deals they've got, they're going to be able to spend money in ways that other clubs can't.
Man United have the most expensive squad in world football by a mile.
Yeah. So there's sales in there as well.
Yeah.
The other thing is we've seen that with United, they do have an academy that still churns out talent. I think Kobe Mainoo's been their best player this season. And the fact that academy is going to still churn out players like that. And if we're talking about Dan Ashworth as someone who's come from the England setup, managing youth there, that's something where you go, okay, well, he can work within that. He can help players come through in that way. In terms of Dan Ashworth going there and them having success over the next 5 or 10 years, if I was a United fan, I'd sort of be looking at his CV and going, you've not proved that you can move up to a bigger club. Because I think we can say that Newcastle are a bigger club than Brighton. I think we can say that you were asking him to do things that he weren't necessarily doing at Brighton in terms of bringing in bigger players on bigger contracts.
I was asking him to get us ready for the Champions League and he failed miserably.
Well, he's not done that.
He failed miserably.
So if I was United, I'd be looking at that and going, I can't really see a track record there of him bringing through big players, him finding players in that kind of category of 30 to 50 million pounds. Whereas what you were saying, Josh, is he was successful finding players just underneath that. So in terms of United's potential, I still think United have the potential to be a big club for a long time, because I think the FFP rules now really benefit them compared to clubs who've just had money come in like recently.
Well, just to put it into context, Manchester United are in hundreds of millions of pounds worth of debt. Newcastle are owned by the richest owners in world football. And yet Manchester United are poaching our director of football.
Because
that's how upside down this whole thing is, ironically. So
the last thing when it comes to Dan Ashworth's sort of like talent ID, and we're obviously all looking at the job that he did at Brighton, and the numbers are there for yourself. When you were reading them out there, it's very, very impressive. The only thing I would say is that talent or is that perception? Because the list of names you read out there, right, are they worth the money they were sold for? That's another thing. So is that him identifying talent, or is that him bringing players in that did really well and we all had this certain perception that these were world beaters? But let's be honest, right? I really like Caicedo. He plays for Chelsea and I think he's come good. I don't think he's a £100 million player. I don't think Cucurella's a £65 million player.
That's exactly what a director of football has to do. The director of football has to sell the players.
I do understand that, and from a business aspect. But what we were talking about, the talent ID there. Is Dan Ashworth's talent ID necessarily better than Eddie Howe's talent ID? What I'm saying is, when you look, the fee's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. But then we'd all sit, and every single one of them, we'd go, well, that was an overpriced, that was an overpriced, that was an overpriced. There's none that they've moved on that you go, yeah, fair value.
Do you honestly think that Eddie Howe is going out there and looking at Sven Botman and scouting him and thinking, yeah, I'll sign that guy?
No,
do you honestly think he's doing that?
It's not as simple as that, Josh.
See, this is the whole point of when Eddie Howe came in at Newcastle, we did not have a director of football. So who else are they going to ask?
Well,
Josh?
no, but look,
answer the question.
There's loads of it. They could have an outside consultant. You'd never know who they were. They would hire all these people as third-party contractors.
But for you to say that you're literally acting like it's a hilarious suggestion that the manager of Newcastle United would have a say in the transfers of players he's going to be managing when we've just been bought by new owners. Do you really think that's a silly suggestion?
Leave the conspiracy theories to the main mate. Leave the conspiracy theories.
Josh, we weren't in modern football, mate. We've just been fucking forced.
No, can we clear this up? Can we clear this up? What would have been happening, as we alluded to earlier, there are teams of scouts, there are scouting departments, and no one's like Eddie Howe isn't going and watching players. No. Modern managers don't have time to do that. Teams of scouts go out, watch players, present them to managers and directors of football, and in a committee situation, not too dissimilar from this, people will go, I want that one, and the other guy goes, I want that one.
That's exactly what I'm suggesting, that Eddie Howe, in that scenario, was the one they were talking to because we did not have a director of football. Does that not make sense?
I mean, like you say, it makes sense that he's part of a committee. I don't think you can say Sven Botman is an Eddie Howe signing at all.
But the same way that you've just sat there and gave Dan Ashworth all the credit for every single fucking Brighton signing is exactly the same reason why I'm saying, in short, Eddie Howe would have had the final say on these players because we didn't have a director of football. I'm not saying Eddie Howe did the little scouting and fucking watched every game they played, but neither does Dan Ashworth, mate.
Yeah. I think if you look at the track records and you look at the CV,
no,
where Eddie Howe was,
he's changed the subject now.
No, I'm not.
I think if you look at the track record,
I'm not.
Keep it on the subject. Do you think Dan Ashworth is the one who's doing every bit of scouting?
No, he's not. Absolutely not. But he's the one that's in charge of the scouting department.
But it's no different to what I've just said to Eddie Howe. At the time, we only had him. So, of course, Eddie was the one.
So Eddie Howe gets more credit because he's part of a committee at the end of the...
Did I say that?
No,
did I say Eddie Howe gets more credit?
No, you said that
At what point did I say Eddie Howe gets more credit than Dan Ashworth?
You said that Sven Botman was an Eddie Howe signing. Quote it.
Okay, and
which is
at no point does that mean, what you've just inferred, that gives him more credit than Dan Ashworth. Dan Ashworth gets the credit for the Brighton signings when we didn't have a director of football. Eddie Howe gets the credit for the signings, because who else am I going to credit to? I've got no fucking idea who else is the one signing off.
I'll ask a question as well, yeah. In terms of Brighton bringing in unheard of players and moving them on for 5, 6, 7 times what they paid for them, do you think that's done now then? Because I don't.
As in, because Dan Ashworth's left.
Yeah. Do you think that's done now?
No, but
because I don't.
But also,
I'm looking at a lot of their players this season. I'm thinking someone's coming in for you in the summer. I'd never heard of you, and you're going to get £60 million move now.
And all of this is shades of grey, right? All of this is shades of grey because it's obviously not all Dan Ashworth's doing, and it's not all Eddie Howe's doing because there's transfer committees, as we say. But what I would say is Ashworth was part of that revolutionary system at Brighton that have got them to where they are now. So to sort of write off his impact of Brighton or them as a football club, and then say someone is going to take over. If you're going to build something transformational or a recruitment strategy, you've got to start somewhere. And he gave them an unbelievable start, and look at where they are now.
If this is, the context is like for like, but Newcastle are called Chelsea right now, are you panicked that he's leaving? Because I'm gonna say if I was a Newcastle fan right now, got no horse in the race, I'm not sitting there panicked that he's leaving.
It certainly concerns me because I think what you do as a football club is you plan with the two, like say for instance, let's just use Chelsea's example, right? We've got 2 directors of football, we've got a recruitment strategy below them. They're the ones that are sort of going out and doing
the 2 directors
exactly. How unfair.
Fucking hell.
And we're putting down this sort of like 10-year plan of what we're going to do to revolutionise Chelsea Football Club. Ashworth was 18 months into that plan, and when that changes, you then have to start again.
Yep.
Like
there's one thing that does bother me a little bit. I'm like, you're going to someone and you're going to tell them everything about our club. That is pretty uncool. Do you know? That's something that I'm like, not that fuck me, it's not the end of the world, but it's like there's a certain level of, if you're in La Liga, I wouldn't be, but you're a direct competitor.
Ben Davison linking up with AJ vibes.
It really is.
But it's not the only club that United have done that with. United have taken, is it the CEO off Man City as well? So it's like United are going to have a lot of inside info on
They're also trying to pinch our head of recruitment analyst.
I'd be awful if they came and pinched Bowley, wouldn't it?
I do think that this is a good look for Man United. It's aggressive, it's competitive. I rate rate this from them. Like it's a good move.
And I think we trust Ineos, right? You trust the people that have gone into Man United because the success they've had in other sports. You go, okay, well they seem to know what they're doing. The Ashworth thing, I know that you say, well, you know, the fact that he's leaving that soon into his tenure, does it look good? But then you go, well, if it's not working, is it not better to just end it quickly? That's the thing you say in business.
But is it not working?
Well, I think that's so hard to say it's not working.
Is it? Tell me, is it working?
From what I understand, the Eddie Howe relationship with Dan Ashworth is not great. I don't know how bad it is, but I think the fact that Lewis Hall, we've been scratching our head all season, and this makes a bit more sense of the Lewis Hall transfer.
Right.
Why do you agree a 35 million roughly fee for an 18-year-old lad? He comes in and Eddie Howe blatantly does not want to play him and flat out has refused to. In fact, in the last game, we bring on a kid who's been on loan at League Two. I forgot his name, God bless him. I've never seen the kid in my life getting on ahead of Lewis Hall. That tells me there is something wrong with that recruitment and that he does not rate him.
So and something really similar happened at Arsenal about 4 years ago, by the way. I think if you've got a situation like that where the manager and the director of football are clearly at loggerheads, you pick a horse. And I think in this one, when you're Newcastle United and you're looking at either Eddie Howe or Dan Ashworth and you look over the recent history of what they've done for Newcastle, you pick Eddie Howe.
I think you're giving Newcastle a load of credit here. I think Ashworth has made a personal decision that he wants to go and
all right, fair enough.
But I don't think it's anything to do with Newcastle. I think they're scrambling around to make up the difference now.
I don't think this is something that's only appeared in the last week or so. I think this has been, like you've alluded to all season, Brian. Like we know that there were transfers that came in over the summer that Eddie hasn't wanted to use.
That weren't good enough.
So there's clearly been an issue for 6 months.
I agree with Josh.
Tino Livramento and Tonali are like more than good enough to play for Newcastle.
They're good enough, but one of them's got a gambling addiction. Like if you're that good a director of football, if you do that good a scouting, you should know that. Everyone in Italy knew that. At Arsenal, we had a really similar thing a few years ago where we had Raul Sanllehi, who came from Spain with a big CV. We had Sven Mislintat, who came from Germany, who'd scouted big players. And we also had Edu. Edu was the most junior in those positions, and they were really powerful. Sanllehi did some mad shit. He was behind the Nicolas Pepe signing, right? 72 million quid. The guy was awful. And by the way, if you read into that, a lot of it stinks of corruption, right? We had a situation where all three of them were disagreeing. There was problems in the club, and there was one man that we all trusted, and it was Arteta. Arteta clearly said, Edu's the one I trust out of all of them. The other two are gone. We've stuck with Edu and his transfers, and where are we?
I agree with...
The point I'm trying to make is, when you've got disagreements at the top of your club, I think the best thing to do, pick a horse.
Didn't Klopp have a similar situation at Liverpool where he was sort of butting heads a little bit with a director of sorts? Am I wrong there? Wasn't they really?
They have changed. They have changed recently. They have had a short-term option.
You have to pick a horse. And I think you have to choose someone you trust. And I think when you look at previous clubs, trusting the manager isn't always the worst thing to do, even if it feels like you're ripping up something that should be long-term. Because the worst thing to do is to stick with something long-term that isn't working.
The best clubs in the world, what they do is they build around the manager. They give them an ecosystem where they worked before. There's a good working relationship. Like look at Pep at City. They built an entire backroom team and management team around Pep to get him to the club in the first place, and then to sort of succeed at a football club. I think if you're doing that around Eddie Howe in Newcastle, that's a scary thing. Like who are you building around Eddie Howe? What's the Bournemouth connection, the director of football, that's going to make Eddie Howe a better manager? That's it's a scary gamble to make.
Everything's a scary gamble when you compare it to Man City and Pep Guardiola. Yeah. You've literally set up an argument there that I can't compare to because you're comparing Eddie Howe to Pep Guardiola and Man City.
Yeah, but look at Arsenal.
Who'd you go get?
Yeah, but then look at Arsenal. What they did with Arteta, they had someone that had worked with Arteta before, knew him really well in Edu.
Edu hadn't worked with Arteta before.
Well, they knew each other very well.
I don't know.
They were friends on Facebook.
I will help you out and give you another example, which is Villa. Monchi and Emery worked together in Spain. It doesn't have to be a working relationship that had existed before. Eddie Howe's worked in football for an awful long time. I'm sure he knows plenty of directors of football. I'm sure Newcastle know plenty of directors of football. There's not only Dan Ashworth, and it's not fair to say that the only people that Eddie Howe can have a good working working relationship with are people that he's worked together previously.
Yeah, true.
Like you can
the
build
problem
new
here, lads, is managers are a senior role at a football club, but a director of football can undermine that. And if these two people aren't gelling, it's never going to work. And from everything I'm aware of, I don't think that is the case between Eddie and Dan Ashworth. I don't think they've gelled. I don't think that the way Eddie's refused to play Lewis Hall, I think that shows they haven't gelled. Otherwise, why the fuck would Eddie have signed off on that and didn't deliberately not played him? That shows we are not aligned. So I think it's a good move for everyone that Dan Ashworth moves to Man United. It's a great opportunity for him. But now I'm obviously worried about what Newcastle do next. And you've rightly pointed out, we need to act. And I haven't got a clue what the fuck we're going to do. I mean, the squad needs help right now. We've got Callum Wilson, who is going to break Michael Owen's record for number of days missed through injury at Newcastle United. He's literally 48% injured in his Newcastle career. And his legs have completely gone. So with Isak picking up injuries, that's a worry because he carries those little knocks. And then we've got so many players in that squad who are just not good enough, right? It's funny that we've been compared to Man United and you see the level of talent that they just have in their squad last season for us to finish even near them. And this season you can really see when we get one or two injuries, the drop off is huge. So we do need that infrastructure brought in desperately, but it's going to be interesting to see where they turn